now. Yeah, the recording is going to be for people that RSVP'd that couldn't make it. So it's going to be available on our YouTube channel, and everyone that RSVP'd for this event, whether you were able to make it or not, will receive an email with the recording, the slides, and all the information that we talk about throughout. So I want to welcome you back if you've been here before, and hello if you're new. We're going to continue our Lunch and Learn series. We started it last year. It's about the periodic update, comprehensive plans, and everything associated with it. So we're going to dive into a few different topics over the next couple of months that aren't, jurisdiction housing specific. We're going to be today touching on transportation. Really excited to have Laura here from Downtown on the Go. And so we're going to be discussing transportation in the city of Tacoma and how transportation and housing are connected. Laura Swenzarek from Downtown on the Go is going to kind of explain the connections between the two, how transportation policy in Tacoma works, and go over a couple of potential transportation plans within the city through the lens of Downtown on the Go. And before I introduce Laura, I'm going to briefly introduce myself and the consortium. My name is Casey Twiggs, and I'm the membership coordinator for the Tacoma-Pierce County Affordable Housing Consortium, and I will be your host today. So the consortium is a nonprofit membership-based organization. We provide education, advocacy, and support for the expansion of affordable housing within Pierce County. One way that we do that is by educating the public on the need for affordable housing, by hosting lunch and learns like this, special meetings, and collecting data to share with the public. We also advocate at the state and local level for local policy and funding to support the expansion of affordable housing, the creation of more developments, and to support the work of our members as well. So altogether, our agency is made up of about 65 members, ranging from affordable housing, developers, architects, construction companies, consultants, and anyone in between. Got individuals as well. So if you're interested in learning more about what the consortium does, I will put our website in the chat here. That's helpful for anybody. And now let me introduce our guest for this lunch hour. Laura Swenzarek is the account manager, the advocacy manager at Downtown on the Go. She's a lifelong bus rider and more recently cyclist. She was drawn to transportation, to the transportation field through its connections with sustainability and community. Laura serves on the Sustainable Tacoma Commission, previously served on the city's transit-oriented development advisory group, and participates in a wide variety of projects and policy stakeholder groups, providing a transportation perspective throughout the city. We're really excited to have her here and have this discussion. Laura is everywhere, I know. We serve on the commission together. We give public comment around the same things. Yeah, it's lovely to have her here. One other housekeeping item, I think if we're gonna have questions or comments, we're gonna wait to have verbal comments till the end of the presentation. And if you have other comments that you don't want to lose your thought, just put them in the chat and we'll get to them. At the end of the presentation, we'll have time for questions and discussion. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Laura.
Yeah. All right. Here's the hardest part of any presentation. We got to get the screen share working correctly. Good?
Looks good to me.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for choosing to spend your lunch hour with us today. Thank you for your interest in transportation policy. It's nice to know it's not just me that wants to read about and talk about this stuff. So I appreciate all of your time. There we go. like Casey said, my name is Laura Swanzarek. I'm the advocacy manager at Downtown on the Go. Downtown on the Go is the nonprofit advocate and resource for all things transportation in the greater Tacoma area. We host a wide variety of programs and advocacy work, trying to make it easier for people to walk, bike, and use transit in Tacoma. And I'll talk about some of our other programs at the end of this presentation. But I want to be clear as we jump into this about who I am. I am an advocate. My role in this is to understand the policy, to communicate the policy, and to have opinions about the policy. I am not the City of Tacoma. I'm not a transit agency. I am not a neutral third party. So we will talk a bit about what Downtown on the Go's advocacy agenda is around these topics. But just know that I've got opinions and I'm going to share them. So a quick overview of what this is going to look like today. I'm going to talk about that connection between housing and transportation. We'll do a very general overview about different policies related to transportation in Tacoma, how they intersect. We'll go into specifics on a couple of things, and then we'll talk about what Downtown on the Go is doing around those policies. So housing and transportation are inextricably linked. You cannot separate the two topics from each other. And I want to talk about the two biggest connections between these two topics now. There's a lot we could get into, but I'm going to focus on just kind of those top two. Housing and transportation are the largest household costs for almost all households. It's estimated right now that the cost of car ownership is about $12,000 a year. That is financing, insurance, maintenance, gas, parking, depreciation of vehicle value. The point is that it can be an undue burden on a lot of people to own a personal vehicle. But because of the way that our transportation system is set up, it is often deemed to be a necessity to own a personal vehicle because often there's not a lot of good, safe ways to get where you need to go without one. So if you have to have that transportation cost, then you have to be able to make up some of the costs in other places. And sometimes that can mean moving to more affordable housing. I hope you enjoy my silly little diagram here, but I wanted to kind of show scale. But the idea here is that if you are not able to afford housing in a dense urban area, you move further out from your work, from services, from community, you move out into the suburbs, you move out into rural areas that are getting less and less rural over time. And as you move further out, you are also moving to places that have fewer amenities. And what I mean by amenities is things like sidewalks, bike facilities, transit lines that get you to more places than just job centers, but actually get you to those services and community. So as you move further out, as we sprawl into those rural spaces, it creates a situation where people are more and more dependent on owning a personal vehicle. And maybe that's okay if you're a young professional, but what does that look like if you're a single parent having to juggle a million things? What does that look like if you are too young to drive or you are too old to drive? Our seniors really struggle being further out from healthcare services. If you're not able to drive yourself and you can't take a bus to get there, how are you supposed to get to your specialist? And you have young people who maybe they want to have jobs after school, maybe they want to see their friends, and it's very challenging for them to do that. So they end up isolated and stuck at home. And the reality is that just because infrastructure is unsafe for getting around outside of a car doesn't mean that people won't use it. People get forced into unsafe situations on infrastructure that is not designed for them because they have to get where they're going to go. I spent a while living without a car out on the Key Peninsula, and I did a whole lot of sketchy things trying to get to the grocery store because I had to go to the grocery store. You can't take away the reality that people are living with when they are pushed out from those urban centers. So this is a problem. What are we doing about it? Ultimately, we need policy that empowers movement outside of personal vehicles and lowers household transportation costs. So that's the lens that we're kind of going into this overview of policy with. I want to preface this and say this is like a super general little PowerPoint diagram. Don't take it too literally here. But as Casey said, these lunch and learns are about comprehensive plans, and our focus today is about transportation. So we're looking at a couple of different policy documents that tie into the comprehensive plan. I think most people here are probably familiar with Home in Tacoma. Home in Tacoma does interact with the comprehensive plan. It's also a means of implementation of different housing strategies. Again, this is just an overview right now. The Transportation Master Plan is a component of the comprehensive plan. It also feeds into what's called the Transportation Improvement Program. And then there's other things like sub-area plans, which have transportation components to them. You can think of that kind of as an implementation strategy, but we're not going to get into sub-area plans today. These are just a couple of things. There are a million different documents that influence transportation policy. Climate Action Plan. There's folks from Pierce Transit here today. Pierce Transit has its own long-range planning, Puget Sound Regional Council. I don't think I even put Vision Zero on here, but we have a lot of other documents that go into influencing our transportation policy too. So today we're really focusing on Home in Tacoma and the Transportation Master Plan. So a quick overview of Tacoma's comprehensive plan. Very quick, because I'm sure most people here are aware of this, but comprehensive plans are 20-year documents required to be updated every 10 years via the Growth Management Act. These guide our policy priorities, what types of projects we're working on. Nothing in policy is ever totally set in stone. Things can be updated and amended over time, but the point is that the comprehensive plan is an incredibly influential document that will influence the decisions that we make over the next decade. So it's important going into the update process that we ensure that it reflects our values and sets us up for success on transportation, climate, housing, all of these things. Tacoma's comprehensive plan is running a little bit late. The Puget Sound region is doing updates right now, but Tacoma, it's looking like we will be able to view draft documents at the end of this year. So that probably means some public engagement process and opportunities for feedback in spring of next year and adoption in fall of next year. So 2025 adoption of the comprehensive plan. Because of that, it's difficult to speculate what exactly it's going to look like. I think it's safe to say that the main priorities will be housing, transportation, climate, and equity based on other work that the city is doing. But that's about all the details that we can get into on the comprehensive plan itself at this time. So instead, let's talk about Home in Tacoma. Home in Tacoma is a set of policies and zoning updates. It's an affordable housing strategy, right? Tacoma is getting bigger with growth. People are coming to Tacoma, but Tacoma is not getting bigger in space. We don't want to lose the green spaces that we have, and we can't expand out further. So we need to grow up instead of growing out if we want to be able to have enough housing options for everybody who currently lives here and everyone who is going to be moving here. Home in Tacoma has a focus on what we refer to as complete or walkable neighborhoods. So the idea is that if we're increasing density, we want to try to do that in places where there's already infrastructure to accommodate that, especially if we're encouraging people to not have cars or to have fewer cars. We'll talk about that more in a moment. So if we can bring people into spaces where there's already sidewalks, bike facilities, transit lines, that is the ideal situation. But we're also looking at increasing density along major centers and corridors. And often that is our major transit lines also. As far as Home in Tacoma connects to the comprehensive plan, so what's happening right now, what just happened with the Planning Commission and the soon-to-be public engagement process with City Council in a couple months, that's Home in Tacoma Phase 2. Phase two is kind of the implementation, it's the specifics. In 2022, the council adopted phase one, and those were the comprehensive plan updates. So there was an amendment to the comprehensive plan at that time. Some of the updates to the comprehensive plan might be around related topics with housing, and that has to do with consistency with new law from the state legislature that passed last year. But Tacoma is in a really good position, where phase one of Home in Tacoma, for the most part, actually went above the new minimums being required from the state. So that means that Tacoma's already doing the work on this, is already set up for success, and is doing more than the minimum. And we love that. So let's talk about parking. Everybody's favorite thing to talk about, right? Parking. One of the main transportation components of Home in Tacoma is parking minimums. So a parking minimum is the minimum number of parking spots that a developer is required to provide per unit that is developed. So for residential, historically, that's been 2 parking spots per housing unit. It's different for commercial. That has to do with business type, things like that. But so historically, there have been required numbers of parking per unit that is put in. Last year, the state legislature passed House Bill 1110. This is kind of the missing middle housing bill. Again, a lot of stuff that was already covered in Home in Tacoma, but it included a removal of parking minimums within half a mile of high capacity transit. So back up, what is high capacity transit? It's basically any transit that can move a lot of people quickly. In Tacoma, we don't really have a lot of high capacity transit yet. The link in downtown qualifies as high capacity transit, and Pierce Transit on the 31st, I believe, is launching what's called the Stream Community Line. This is an enhanced bus service, so like more buses running for peak commute times on Pacific Avenue, from Tacoma Dome Station down to Spanaway, so on Pacific Avenue. That is high capacity transit. So that doesn't exist yet, but it will be up and running in less than 2 weeks. So that's really exciting. But so what that means is that the requirements coming from the state don't necessarily reflect the realities in Tacoma. And so instead, we want to be planning for future transit and for the transit that we already have, instead of sticking to that strict definition of high capacity transit. So the Planning Commission expanded what's called the reduced parking area that you can kind of see in this map here. They expanded that to include 6th Avenue, which is the highest performing Pierce Transit route, Route 1. Also to include South 19th Street, which is the second highest performing Pierce Transit route. It also will eventually be home to the next link extension that travels to Tacoma Community College, and or a bus rapid transit route. So there's a lot planned there. They also opted to cover Pacific Avenue, knowing that that enhanced bus community line is coming soon. So this is great. And the Planning Commission has also introduced some citywide reductions. So instead of that like 2 stalls per unit, we're looking at 1 stall per unit. Home in Tacoma also has the ability for developers, in the current iteration of the plan, includes the ability for developers to access what they're referring to as like bonus density if they meet affordability requirements and retention of existing buildings. They can increase the number of units they're putting on each lot. There is additional reduced parking requirements for those bonus density units on the lots. And the last thing I'll say on this specifically is there's also enhanced bike parking requirements. So that's actually a big deal. If you live in multifamily, especially if you live not on the ground floor, if you have any stairs, storage of bicycles is a huge barrier to people wanting to try cycling. because you need to be able to keep your bike safe and you need to be able to haul it in and out of the place that you're living. So having long-term covered storage for cycling is actually a really good way of reducing some barriers. Okay, let's let's be honest about what parking is. I know that when we think about the idea of bringing a lot of new people into Tacoma and not giving them a designated place to put their car, that can create a lot of tension and stress for folks. Um, but parking is complicated. So I just want to be clear about why the city is looking at these parking requirement reductions and why we think this is a good thing. So parking is really expensive to build. There's the cost of the land itself, or if you're looking at like lots or even small garages, every parking spot, each individual parking spot can cost tens of thousands of dollars, sometimes more than $50,000 in garages. Like we think of it as just kind of an open space, but it's not. There's a significant cost to providing parking. Parking also takes up a huge amount of space. And when you look at it, parking really is the storage of personal property. So especially if we're looking at like street parking, that is taking publicly owned space and dedicating it for the private storage of personal property. There are other things that we can do, right? And because the parking takes up so much space, more spots required means less units can be built. Just literally, if every unit requires an additional 1 or 2 parking spots, you cannot fit as many units. So we're at a point where we cannot afford to continue prioritizing cars over actual people and their ability to have a place to live. And I don't want to diminish the challenges of getting around without a car. Trust me, I know. And we'll talk more about that at the end of the presentation. But we have to make hard choices at some point, and we simply cannot continue to prioritize parking and vehicle storage over homes. Moving on. So now that we've talked about parking, let's talk about the Transportation Master Plan. The Transportation Master Plan is the transportation component of the comprehensive plan. It was last adopted in 2015. It had some updates in 2018 that introduced like targets for tracking progress on things in the plan, primarily things like that. And the Transportation Master Plan, the TMP, it provides our priorities and our policies around transportation. So what types of projects are we building? How are we prioritizing projects? What are the standards for those projects? What do they look like? It tells us how we build. It also contains a project list, so projects that the city would like to see completed over the next 10 years, and those go into the Transportation Improvement Program, or the TIP. The TIP is a 6-year document, but it is updated every year. So basically, projects are pulled from the TMP list, put into the TIP, and then projects that have been completed are taken off of the list. So that happens every year. Kind of as I said at the beginning, like these types of things are not totally set in stone. It's possible for projects to kind of jump to not be in the master plan, but to make it into the improvement program, or sometimes just to jump all the way to the front based on need and enthusiasm for the projects and things like that. But primarily, projects go through this process. So it takes a long time to get things from the idea to being up for funding to actual implementation. The TMP kind of focuses on 5 modal elements. So those are different modes of getting around: pedestrian, bicyclist, transit, auto, and freight. So it tells us, again, like what are the standards for those modes? What are our priorities for those? How are we doing for people who move around in those different ways? And because the TMP is a component of the comprehensive plan, it's tied to the comprehensive plan's timeline. This means that we're not going to see draft documents for this until the end of the year. Although we are anticipating seeing some equity analysis documents pretty soon on it. But I can speculate on what's going to be in the TMP because we have some great staff at the City of Tacoma who shared what their priorities are on it. So I'll go through these fairly quickly, but we know that the overall priorities going into the plan update are safety, equity, sustainability, and public health. So that should guide all of the other decisions that are made. There needs to be alignment with Home in Tacoma, so that means anticipating growth. That means ensuring that our transportation systems are ready to accommodate more people, but also that they're able to accommodate people traveling by different modes. If Home in Tacoma is encouraging movement without a personal vehicle, we need to be set up to accommodate for that movement. There's collaboration with our transit agencies like Pierce Transit and Sound Transit on how we approach priority transit corridors. This idea of functional element. So what that means is other ways that roadways can be used. So we're talking about like streeteries, parklets, if we get another scooter share vendor, using spots in the public right of way for like parking for those scooters, things like that. So they're looking at expanding kind of the rules and way that they approach and what they allow kind of alternative uses of the public right of way and the roads. They're also introducing the idea of multimodal level of service. So let's talk about what level of service is. This is a way of grading basically what it's like to experience being on a roadway. And currently, Tacoma only does level of service for vehicle travel. That mostly means congestion. So at a certain point, if there's too much congestion, the level of service ranking is too low and it triggers requirements for having to make it better. So the city is looking at introducing multimodal level of service. So standards for minimum experience for pedestrians, for cyclists. And we're really excited about this introduction. It shows prioritizing different travel modes and actually looking critically. It's more than just saying like, there's bike lanes on part of South Tacoma Way. That doesn't mean that it's a good, safe biking experience to be there, right? So thinking more critically about what it's actually like to use the infrastructure. There's a focus on pedestrian movement too. There's a lot of work going into completing our sidewalk network. So that means repairing our sidewalks to ADA standards. It also means completing all of the missing gaps in sidewalks. And also generally looking at project prioritization. How are we picking which projects are moving forward, which ones are up for funding the most, which ones get funding directly from the budget, things like that. And again, that sort of thing is guided by what was up at the top: safety, equity, sustainability, public health. Cool. So now that we've done a quick overview of some of those big policies, I'm going to tell you about what Downtown on the Go is doing related to these topics. So our advocacy priorities, our top priorities are always safety and access. Can people get where they need to go? Can they get there safely? That guides most of what we do. Also influencing what we're working on: equity, climate resilience, and especially this year, we're really focused on density with Home in Tacoma. And I want to take a second to define what I mean by equity in this context. When we're talking about our transportation network and our built environment, we see a lot of historic, systemic disinvestment, particularly in low-income neighborhoods and communities of color. So incomplete sidewalks, lack of safe bike facilities, lack of safe ways to cross the road, lack of bus service that will take you to services or to a variety of locations. So we have to acknowledge that this disproportionate investment has happened, and we need to be looking at how we can rectify that moving forward. And generally, we want to see projects built where they are most needed and not just where they are easiest to implement. Hopefully, there's a middle ground between those two concepts, but we want to see projects that will serve the people who really need them. A couple of other topics for us over this year. We're very invested in seeing collaboration between different jurisdictions. If we want to have a phenomenal transit network in Tacoma and Pierce County, then we need all of our government agencies, all of these jurisdictions to come together with genuine collaboration, sharing of ideas, but also sharing of burdens, sharing of expenses, and overall coming together in the agreement that we need better transit amenities and services in Tacoma and Pierce County, and that's only going to happen if the agencies work together. Like I said, with Home in Tacoma this year, we are advocating for increased density. We are advocating for reduced parking minimums. Those are our main priorities with that. And we're also really encouraging the city to find new funding avenues for active transportation. Primarily, these projects are funded through grant funding. That takes a lot of staff time to do. It also requires match funds for most grants, so that has to be budgeted in the city budget. And oftentimes, they'll run out of match funds for active transportation in the first year of the biennial budget, and then how do we keep moving forward, right? So if we're really invested in increasing safety and access in Tacoma, we need better opportunities for funding. So we're encouraging looking at things like developer impact fees, transportation benefit districts, so kind of small areas with like a hyperlocal tax that helps to fund improvements in that area, or vehicle license fees. There's different ways that we can look about this, but if we want to take it seriously and get this infrastructure that we need, then we need to seriously consider finding more funding. And the last thing that we are advocating for is what I've been calling concurrent investment. It's possible there's an actual term for this, but this is what I've been saying and I like it, so I'm going to continue to say it. So we are looking at increasing density along arterials, putting a lot of new development on transit arterials, and especially affordable housing development. Those arterials are not very nice places to be. You have a lot of really fast, busy vehicle travel. You have air pollution because of that, often a lack of street trees, often sidewalks in disrepair. You have crossings that even if you're crossing at an intersection with a signal, it feels dangerous to be crossing the street. And if we're encouraging people to not have personal vehicles or to have fewer cars per household, then we need to ensure that we are bringing them into a space where it's safe and relatively easy to get around without having that car. We have serious equity concerns about dropping folks on the side of an arterial without any of those amenities and telling them to just kind of make it work. Having secure bike parking doesn't matter if there's not a bike lane. Having access to transit doesn't matter if it only takes you to a job center, but not to your healthcare or to the grocery store or to your community. So we need to be looking at ways to ensure that we are investing in infrastructure at the same time that we are bringing in development. Couldn't it be so much nicer, right? Yeah, so we can dream bigger for what we want our streets to look like. We can create spaces that are accessible and safe and allow people to move confidently without having a personal vehicle. But we need to be taking that investment seriously with funding and with policy and with requirements to ensure that we're making it happen. Okay, last thing, and then we can do questions and maybe we can take a break from listening to me talk. Downtown on the Go has a lot of community events. We have a Friday Forum, a panel event next Friday, actually about affordable housing and density. It's Friday, March 29th from noon to 1, both on Zoom or in person at UW-T. We also are kicking off our 15th year of our Walk Tacoma series. That'll kick off on April 17th. Some of those are during the day, some of those are at night, but they're basically like guided group walks. And the idea is to encourage folks to engage with Tacoma on a meaningful level, meet other people in your community, learn about Tacoma's history, things like that. So there's more information about all of that at downtownonthego.org. And there's my contact information again. Ooh, take a deep breath there.
Sorry, I couldn't find my unmute button. That was awesome, Laura. That was really informative. And I'm gonna include the information about those two events on the follow-up email as well for everybody. But for now, we've got plenty of time if people have some questions, have any comments or anything like that. Does anybody want to contribute to this conversation? We've got questions, we can have discussion. We've got plenty of time.
Do you want me to take the screen share down?
That's up to you.
I'll
You
take
can
it
if
down.
you'd like. I would like to kick off a question, maybe to maybe get some conversation going. But so my question is related to the concurrent investment conversation. As a biker myself, I mean, I don't feel quite comfortable biking in Tacoma. I don't have the right bike. That's on me. Single speed's not ideal, um, but my question always comes back to infrastructure around biking to make it safer, to make it, you know, more attractive to do. Is paint never, it doesn't really do the job. Paint is not infrastructure, to a lot of people who bike and that I've spoken to at least. What do you have? Are you guys talking about that in particular, adding specific like physical buffers, even just like um the little spikes, or can you speak to that?
Yeah, yeah. So if you look at the City of Tacoma's bike project list, as I kind of said, it takes a long time for things to move from idea to funding to implementation. And over the last couple of years, we've seen a real shift in how the city is thinking about bike infrastructure, with more focus on separated or physically protected spaces for bikes. Um, that can kind of mean a couple of things. So you don't necessarily need like physical separation on every roadway. And what I mean by that is like Fawcett Avenue in downtown Tacoma is a bicycle boulevard that the city recently redid. And part of what they did is they installed diverters to keep drivers from being able to use Fawcett Avenue as a through road. So it's a low speed, low traffic space that cyclists are highly encouraged to use as their through route to get through downtown. And that's something that they're looking at doing also on J Street in Hilltop. And this is meant to be like parallel access to the link line because you don't want to be biking on the road with the tracks. You don't want to do that. So instead, it provides a parallel access to the stations and through the Hilltop area. So things like that are nice because they involve the physical barriers against cars, but in kind of a different way. But as far as like, you're right, paint is not infrastructure. Having a little Shero, a little bike icon on the edge of the roadway doesn't make me feel like drivers are going to respect my right to be in the road and take the full lane on my bike. I think a lot about like Yakima in South Tacoma. Yakima has painted bike lanes on it, but I don't bike on Yakima. I bike on Park Street, Park Avenue, which is uh, parallel to Yakima. It's another one of those bicycle boulevards, but it hasn't been updated yet, so it doesn't have things like those diverters. So it feels better for me, but oftentimes people will still pass me fairly aggressively, even on these neighborhood roads.
Yeah.
Um, we unfortunately, what driving does, and this isn't a personal attack on anybody, it's the way that it's just the reality of how cars are. You're in your own little world. You've got your music on, you're separated from everybody else, and it feels like you're trying to get to your location as fast as possible. It becomes a very me versus them sort of situation when you're driving, even if you're like really trying not to do that. So we we are obligated to try to create safety for what's referred to as vulnerable road users. That's a state term that I don't really like. But people walking, people cycling, people who would be the ones who would get really injured if there was a crash between a vehicle and a pedestrian or cyclist. You know, only one of those categories is the one that's going to get hurt or potentially die in that situation. So we are, it is critical to create roadways where there's physical safety provided for those vulnerable users, but also roadways that encourage drivers to slow down and pay more attention to their surroundings.
I wonder who has the answer to that specifically in terms of drivers in Tacoma. It's a little bit lawless out here sometimes. Um, yeah, so do we have any questions from anybody participating um that's watching? Mandatory speed limiting technology. I know they do that with the scooters. They can do that with scooters. It's pretty crazy. We have another question. Two questions for
Yeah, I
Laura.
mean, my e-bike is speed limited. I can't go over 20
Yeah.
miles an hour if I tried unless I'm going down a steep hill. Um, yeah, and Larry is also working on who asked the question or made the statement about mandatory speed limiting. He's with Forever Green Trails. Shout out to Larry. He's looking at if we can get the city to install speed limiting technology in their fleet vehicles. That's kind of a starting point. Because why introduce the ability to travel at dangerous speeds? Why allow that fundamentally?
Wow, that's cool. I didn't know we were quite there yet. That's pretty cool. I'm gonna take the hand raised question first, and then I'll take Troy's question. So Sean, you can take yourself off mute and ask your question.
I am, and I'm gonna put myself on video as well.
Yay!
Laura, thank you very much. We are very big supporters of Downtown on the Go. You talk a lot about advocacy work with the City of Tacoma. I guess my question to you is when you talk about your advocacy work with the City of Tacoma and equity and public health and parking, I think a lot of us on here can agree that when you talk about equity and public health, you talk about our lower income folks. And in regards to all of that, in being an advocate to the city of Tacoma, Pierce Transit is 90% of our options here in Tacoma. So what is Downtown on the Go doing to advocate to Pierce Transit for more frequent bus services, for the new runner that's coming out, which is amazing. I take it often now. I is Downtown on the Go doing anything? I'm giving you kind of a two-part question here, but what is Downtown on the Go going to do to help promote that great service of the runner, as opposed to advocacy work with Pierce Transit because they basically provide 90% of the transportation options in Tacoma. Thank you.
Yeah. Um, okay, so two parts there. With the runner service. So if people don't know about the runner, it's like an on-demand service that's available in certain areas around Tacoma and Pierce County, Puyallup, JBLM, Gig Harbor Runner just launched. So it's using a separate app to basically like call a ride, like ride hailing within a certain area. And Pierce Transit is doing some interesting stuff with that right now. To give some broader context, so there's a shortage of transit operators nationwide. It's not a Pierce Transit problem. It's not even a Washington problem. It's a national problem of a lot of transit operators retired when COVID started, and it's been a struggle to get enough new operators in to be able to get service levels back where they were before COVID happened. And so Pierce Transit is being very creative about how they can leverage the operators that they have. And so by moving a couple of lower ridership routes, like the Route 63 that goes to Northeast Tacoma, I want to say the 13, those ones are being transitioned into runner service areas. So it provides a lot more flexibility. The learning curve with runner is that it feels separate. It's got a different app. So we're sharing out some information about that as it comes up. We always invite Pierce Transit to be at our events to share information too. I'm hoping to make like a runner video at some point when I have like a little bit of breathing room. I would like to be able to do that. But yeah, because people need to know about this new service that's offered, especially as it's replacing some of the existing fixed route service. We need to ensure that people are able to access it and know that it's there. Maybe that answered the question, but as far as advocacy with Pierce Transit, I'm at all of the board meetings. I'm always listening to what's going on there. Shout out to everybody from Pierce Transit who is in this meeting right now. And often, one of the things that Downtown on the Go does is we provide kind of a user perspective to a lot of stakeholder and input groups. So I've been on the bus rapid transit stakeholder groups and the expansion study, things like that. So trying to provide kind of bridging that gap between technical knowledge and lived experience, and sharing what I hear from my friends who actually also use transit and are out on the service, and being able to communicate those stories directly to Pierce Transit, incorporate them into projects before they go to implementation. You know, we want to get things right the first time. So we're always trying to help to bring in that user perspective. And then providing feedback on long range planning documents and things like that. So we're always kind of watching what's going on and trying to be as supportive as we can, because we rely on Sound Transit and we all want to come together to ensure that we have as best transit service as we can in Tacoma.
Thank you.
Troy had some questions there. I can just go ahead and do that. If that's cool with Casey. So Troy asked, are parking minimums aligned with Tacoma's climate, mobility, and housing goals? Yes. Like I said, like we have to make hard decisions now. We cannot continue to do business as usual to allow driving to be the primary default only good option for people. And that means electric vehicles too. We need to be shifting away from cars as much as possible. So like the climate action plan has mode shift goals. And you see those in the Home and Tacoma environmental impact analysis too. What we want to see our mode split look like. And so that is less single occupancy vehicle driving, more walking, more biking. I personally think that e-bikes are going to be the thing that really revolutionizes how we get around. I see people all the time getting into biking because they have e-bikes now, and it helps people to deal with the hills that we have here. So personally, I think biking is really one of our best ways forward for local trips. And that's something to note too, is that most trips that people take are less than 5 miles or less than 3 miles. And those are trips that can really easily be handled by something like an electric bicycle. And the second question to that was, is City of Tacoma being sufficiently aggressive in reducing or eliminating parking minimums? I'm really impressed with the work that the Planning Commission has put forward around the reduced parking area, including those overall reductions throughout the full city is great. And then being willing to push and say that even though these areas don't technically meet the definitions of the state requirements, but in the spirit of the law, you know, like this is where our transit is. This is where we should be focusing on trying to get people out of cars. I'm impressed with what the Planning Commission has put forward, and we will be advocating strongly to the City Council to keep the expanded reduced parking area in Home in Tacoma as it moves through that process.
And do you have a favorite city for multimodal transportation?
Oh gosh. I'm going to Japan in a couple weeks. So I'm just really excited to be on like a legit train system. I love that. I live for a good rail system. Otherwise, like if I'm visiting somewhere, I love to find an excuse to be able to rent a bike and bike around. Because I love biking. And when you're in a vehicle, like you don't really notice the details of what's going on around you. But if you're walking to or from transit or just walking in general, if you're on a bike, like that's when you actually notice stuff and have cool last second experiences. And yeah.
Do you think that Portland is kind of on scale somewhere that, I mean, we may not be able to get to, but they're pretty progressive in that way?
I've never been to Portland. I know. How weird is that? But Portland, I mean, Portland is known for having a really good bike network.
They do.
Yeah.
We've got a couple
I think all things are achievable with prioritizing and with investment. We can get there.
So Larry had a couple of, we've got the link in there, and then there's a couple of follow-up information. I can include your email as well in that follow-up as well. And then it looks like, do we have another question before Larry raised his hand? Japan's public transportation is amazing. Larry, go ahead and ask your question. You can take yourself off mute.
Thanks. Laura, let me know if you don't know the answer to this. I wouldn't blame you if you didn't. But since Tacoma doesn't currently have impact fees, how are they dealing with the impacts of development? Are they using SEPA mitigation processes for every development, or developments of a certain, like, that meet a certain threshold and above? Do you know how that is going? Because it seems like if you're not accommodating the costs of growth, you're just put extra strain on either the existing system or the existing taxpayers.
Yeah, I mean, that's technical beyond me, so I can't give you a good answer on that one. But I mean, it's a really valid point, right? Is we need to be, like you said, we need to be ensuring that we're ready for the impacts of development too, because we need the development, but we can still do it in a smart and progressive way.
I know it gets challenging because that impact fee costs get passed along in terms of housing price, but ideally we would also be having zoning, etc., to support utilizing our existing infrastructure as efficiently as possible with increased density and supporting travel by transit, etc. The road's already there. Let's run transit on that rather than far-flung, sprawly developments, and now we have to widen the roadway, etc., etc. So anyway,
yeah, well, totally. I don't think
Laura
there's like
talk a lot.
Perfect. Yeah, we talk all the time. Yeah, I don't think there's any perfect funding option, right? There's always drawbacks, but I think we need to like really seriously consider and look into. Do the benefits outweigh costs that might get continued further down the line, you know? And I think they probably do. We need to fund this stuff. We have to. People are dying in the streets, and we are in a climate crisis. We can't afford to keep doing things the way that we have been.
Well said. You have time for maybe one other question? If not, we'll start wrapping it up. If you have another question, just throw it in the chat or raise your hand, take yourself off mute and interrupt me as I babble. Yeah, we've got a lot, all of the resources, all of the links, all the information that's been shared in the chat. I've been taking log of that, and it's going to be included in the follow-up email, even if, you know, everybody's here currently right now, but your colleagues, anybody else that you know that registered for this event, will get that information as well. And then next week's forum, I have that. Oh, that's an even better link. Thank you. Yeah, does anybody have any last minute questions? Perfect. Yeah, I think that this was a really great conversation, and obviously we're going to keep having the conversation between transportation and housing open. It's clear how connected they are, and I really appreciate Laura for having this conversation and doing it so well. And yeah, we have another Lunch and Learn. It's going to be on the 4th of April. We're going to be joined by at least one research assistant. It's going to be a little bit of a different type of presentation. These are research assistants from the University of Washington. They've been working on a project. They've been doing archival research into racial restrictive covenants, the history of segregation in Pierce County and Tacoma, and how that is influencing some state policy. It's going to be a really cool, very, very informative discussion. So hope that you can make it to that. You'll be able to sign up on our website, and we'll be sending out invites. So everybody take care. Have a nice day. We'll see you next time. Thank you so much, Laura.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.